Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hi, I'm Flight Lieutenant Chris Sully and welcome to the latest RAF Inside Air podcast. In this end-of-the-year episode, we're looking back at the top 10 moments from Inside Air in 2023. Under the Hat and Reheat are taking well-earned Christmas breaks, but we'll be back for the next episode. So with no delays and delivered directly to your inbox, here's AS1 Victoria Andrews with a selection of prime Inside Air cuts and absolutely no puddings.
I'm AS1 Victoria Andrews and this is... Okay, on this occasion, I'm not actually bringing you an edition of Reheat. For 1 week, I'm stepping away from the news roundup and instead bringing you a different sort of recap and look back. This is the 80th episode of Inside Air, and as is tradition at this time of year on the podcast, we reflect on the myriad of topics we've covered and interviewees we've spoken to. In that time, we've covered topics from the front line, while also bringing you the lighter side of life behind the wire in the RAF. So let's jump into our countdown, which looks back at the top 10 episodes released this year based on the number of downloads in their first week.
10.
In at number 10, we have episode 73, Move, Think, Eat and Sleep. In this episode, Squadron Leader Scales visits RAF Coningsby to learn more about the RAF's new fitness strategy. Not one to sit on the sidelines, Squadron Leader Scales fully immerses himself in the experience in an episode that made me laugh out loud on more than one occasion.
I can see exactly what he's going to make me do. It looks terrifying.
Are you ready for the challenge? Okay.
I'm ready for the challenge.
Climber ready?
All right, climbing now. So, starting my ascent. Basically, I'm just climbing up a ridiculously long pole with bits of wood nailed quite securely on the edges. I think the key is just not to look down, but the wobbling has started. So I'm up this pole, and already it's pretty wobbly.
No, I'm giving you a little bit of slack in this system here because.
So I think I've done the easy part now because it's going to get harder. So now I'm at the top of the pole, and then above the pole is like a platform that's sticking over. So I can't just climb onto it. I've got to climb out and expose myself to the ground, which is quite far down. And there's almost nothing to grip. So I'm leaning out across, and then I'm on top of the platform now, on my knees. I must be... How high am I? What?
You're about 40 foot.
40 feet?
Yep.
It's a very long 40 feet.
It's quite a long 40 feet.
Yeah.
I adjusted the wobbleometer this morning because I knew you were coming, you see.
It's definitely
so it's
wobbly.
Slightly more wobbly.
But the weather's good. Oh my word, this is...
All right, so you've got to trust yourself and look up at that trapeze. You've got to visualise what you're going to achieve. And then once you're happy, stand up and then jump for it. Now bearing in mind, it's the same outcome. So the success point isn't really getting that trapeze. The success point is actually going through and actually taking part in this.
That trapeze looks a long way from here.
It's not, I can promise you. Now again, what's happening is that's internally, you're internalising that and you're making it seem further away. So what you've now got to do is almost reframe that and think it's actually quite close. So it's all about positive reframing.
So I need to stand up now and face that trapeze.
Yep.
Right.
So once you're happy, I'm going to tighten it a little bit, but not too much because it's obviously, as you can see, it's directly underneath.
Oh my God!
The rope is directly underneath. I'm going to give you a little bit more slack so you feel comfortable. So take it in stages.
Yeah.
Nice and steady. Once you've composed yourself, because you need to spring off shortly, so you need to compose yourself. Be aware that as you stand up, your centre of gravity's gone higher, and you're going to feel slightly wobbly. So make sure you've got.
The instinct is to hold the cable. The wobble is the problem.
It is. The wobble is the problem. Yep, definitely.
I can feel the pull. So I'm literally standing on the edge now of the platform.
Good. The key thing now is just to compose yourself. So slight flex in the knees because you're going to spring and you're going to jump forward. And the key thing is to visualise that bar and jump for it.
Okay, give me a sec. So I'm really having
You need to jump
psych
up,
myself.
up and across.
Yeah, okay, give me a moment.
Okay?
So what I'm doing now, I'm just looking at the pole, the trapeze ahead of me. I'm not looking down, I'm not even thinking about that. I'm just looking ahead. It's still very difficult. It almost feels out of focus. 1 minute I think I can make it, the next second I think there's no way I'm going to reach it. I'm going to have to stick my arms out, and that's the other thing, because I want to protect myself, but I'm going to have to jump. So if I jump now, you're going to be ready for me.
100%. 100%. So visualise that trapeze.
Okay.
Arms outstretched.
The more I think about it, the worse it becomes. I've got to overcome this. I've got to think about just do it. For God's sake, just do it. Just go. Yes! Yes! Yes!
Brilliant.
Oh my word!
How are you feeling?
Oh, that's amazing! I absolutely did it! Oh my word!
That's fantastic.
Now on to episode 60, which comes in at number 9, ORF Leaders, Born or Made. An interesting question, so to find out the answer to this and talk about leadership in the service, Squadron Leader Peter Lisney went to ORF Cranwell to meet with the now Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Rich Knighton, and Warrant Officer Mark Willis from the Tedder Academy of Leadership.
One of the lessons I've learned through my career is that if you consciously give people a voice, you make sure it's clear that they've been heard and that it's clear that their perspective has weighed in your decision making, and you articulate that. In almost every case in my career, people accept that because you want to feel heard, and that is a part of the job of the leader, it seems to me, is to make sure you do hear. And when things go wrong, when I think about mistakes I've made, it's when I haven't listened hard enough to the full breadth of perspective and then weighed it. And that's the responsibility of the leader is to decide. And Tony Blair said, when you decide, you divide sometimes. But my experience is if you have genuinely heard people and make it known that you've heard them, actually, generally they respect you for your judgment and consideration.
And do you think we're good at that, sir? Because I agree with you, it's a real valid point, but I guess from my perspective, I see sometimes that you, or some of our senior leadership, and I'll include squadron leaders in that bracket, are playing a game to a certain extent, you know, and they say they're listening, they say you're being taken into account, but actually it's a game to them, you know, and they're not authentic in that way that they're delivering.
So there's something paradoxical about leading change in particular. If you're going to be successful at leading change, you've got to be determined. You've got to be absolutely committed to delivering that change. Because if we stopped trying to move forward every time somebody went, oh, that'll never work, I don't like that, humankind would not have progressed. But the paradoxical thing is, at the same time, you've got to be absolutely clear-eyed that in driving forward, you're not going to drive off the edge of the cliff. And you've got to listen to those perspectives, and you've got to hold that determination and commit to people. And if you'll forgive me a little anecdote, there's a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. There's a story in there about a guy called Admiral Stockdale, who was the most senior American officer who was shot down in Vietnam, and he spent many years, about 7-8 years, I think, in a prisoner of war camp. And when asked what he thought was the biggest problem when he was there, the thing he most feared, he said the optimists. He said you have to have absolute faith that we were going to be released, but you also had to be entirely realistic that it might not be before Christmas, which was what people said. And I think there's a lot in that. It's this commitment to it. Where I think that perhaps, and there are examples, I would say, where we have got that wrong, and I've done this in my career, is where you are trying to move potentially too quickly, or actually you've decided and you've concluded that this is what's going to happen, and you're going to get some kind of noisy dissenters, but actually you get to the point too quickly of driving on without listening to those dissenters. You're not going to necessarily bring everybody with you. That's a key part of leadership, is to bring people with you. But you do, it seems to me, have to listen. And I think we don't always do that as well as we should. And if you'll permit me another story rather than an anecdote, but in my second tour, I was OC aircraft maintenance flight at RAF Coningsby. And I thought, I was kind of thinking quite a lot about this. And I remember being with the station commander, and I started lecturing the station commander on my views on leadership, which didn't do me any harm, I guess. But but what was interesting was we were talking about this issue of consultative leadership and at the other end of the spectrum, kind of shouty, pointy leadership. And the example I used was something we'd been doing with my team in the hangar that week, which was thinking about what happens if there's a fire in the hangar. Now, if there's a fire in the hangar, you haven't got time to sit around and have a little circle and kind of chew over what you're going to do and who's got the best idea. You need to get the flipping aeroplanes out and stop the thing burning down. But what you can do is spend time before the event happens talking to the people who really know how to move aeroplanes around in a hangar, which was not me as Flight Lieutenant OCAMF. And that's what we did. And actually through that, we came up with some different ideas, or the team came up with some different ideas about how we would deal with it in that circumstance. And so come the day, we'd be shouting at each other and getting a thing to do, but we would have done the work to listen and think about the problem beforehand.
In the first of 2 appearances in the top 10 Inside Air episodes of 2023, Air and Space Commander Air Marshal Harv Smith gives a frank warning about espionage and how former RAF personnel are being approached to work for companies linked to potential adversaries. In at number 8, this is episode 74, Espionage, a Local Threat. Certainly a thought-provoking listen when it was released.
It wouldn't be often I would use words like treachery and treason, but that's what I think this is. I think people that take large sums of money to go and share things like TTPs and more with a nation that could become a potential adversary to us, and some of that rhetoric we see play out on the public scene. That feels like treachery and treason to me. That feels like not the types of qualities in a person that I would want to be in the RAF. That feels like you're letting down your previous colleagues, your friends, families, the nation. You know, where does it stop? So hence my comment earlier about this making me feel quite angry, because it should do, and it should make our people feel angry as well, because ultimately, and I am convinced that should there end up being some semblance of conflict, God forbid there is, and hopefully we continue to work through in a way that we don't end up in a conflict. But if there was a conflict, I am convinced that these people that have sold their souls to share things like Western TTPs, it will cost lives. It will cost our folks lives, because they don't have that intellectual advantage on day one of the fight. When they enter the fight, their adversary will know what their TTP is going to be, and it'll be a fairer fight rather than a fight that we know we can win right off the bat. So I think there's that point as a start. And secondly, again, linking to the discussion around the National Security Bill, now that that has achieved royal assent and we're moving forward with that in a more meaningful way as a tool to deter and ultimately as a tool to punish, within the text of the National Security Bill, it specifically references people that would do those types of activities, and in particular, the sharing of TTPs. So those folk that are doing it now with the National Security Bill over the line could be liable to prosecution, and there's work going on across Whitehall to that endeavour. We're having a lot of discussion, not just within the UK and within our own department, MOD, but also with our very close allies across NATO. I've had quite a few discussions into NATO and with the US to try to make our folk aware that this threat is there, that, you know, if someone approaches you in the pub and tells you that you're the funniest and most handsome person they've ever met, and would you like £250,000 to come and teach someone how to do something that's unclassified, that should feel a bit weird to you. If that doesn't normally happen on a Friday night, that should probably ring alarm bells, and you need to pick the phone up. And I think that's the last point. It's about, since I've been involved with this, what's been really interesting to me is just how many folk have come up to me and said, I know someone that was approached on this, or, on my whatever WhatsApp group, we've been talking about this, and there's a whole list of names put up. And we're asking people, if you've been approached, please let us know. If you know someone else who's been approached, or worse, if you know someone who's doing it, please let us know. If you're aware of anything about it and you think that just doesn't feel right, just let us know. We're just trying to get our arms around it to close it down.
Like I said at the top, to level the playing field, this top 10 chart is based on the number of downloads in the first week of release. While this next episode comes in at number 7, it's worth mentioning that it's also the most popular episode of 2023 as a whole, with the largest number of total downloads. In episode 64, Agile Combat Employment, Air Marshal Harv Smith explains why the RAF has been shifting towards ACE and what it will mean for RAF personnel. I really engaged with this episode myself. This Agile mindset is a dynamic way of operating, and I'm excited to see what that might look like in 2024 and into the future.
To bring the ACE concept to life, a challenge I could set would be to the station commander at Lossiemouth. You are to continue to do QRA North, but you're not allowed to have your assets in any one single place for any more than one day at a time. Keep moving. Be a moving target. Don't sit.
Like a boxer.
Like a boxer. So that, to me, if you think of it like that, that's what Agile Combat Employment is. And the reality is, when you really kind of get under the skin of it and say, well, how do we do that? There's a cultural piece. There's a piece around our people being ready to do that, to move around quickly, be agile, be fleet of foot, be ready to go, a readiness and a resilience to it. Back in the day, we would have called that Bergen ready. My first tour, it's taken me this, I don't know how long we've been going in the podcast. I'm sure someone will have a sweepstake taken on how long it takes me to talk about being a Harrier pilot. But anyway, on my first tour on a Harrier squadron, we were still doing this because it was the
Strike Command.
Yes, and it was the tail end of the Cold War in the early 90s. And we had 2 lockers in work, one for your flying kit and one for your deployment kit. And your deployment kit was packed and ready to go, so that if at any stage in work the hooter went, you would go to your deployment kit locker, pick it up, you knew you had everything you needed, and you stepped out the door and you went. And we practiced that quite regularly. It was in our DNA. We've not had to do that since the mid-90s because our role and the adversary has been different, so we've not necessarily had to do it. And we've fallen out of the habit of it, and I think we need to try to get back. So there's a cultural thing around the readiness and the resilience of it. There's also a logistics piece around it, because back in those days, we had all the logistics support to do that. So my first squadron, 3 fighter squadron, brilliant squadron, we had our own MT. We had all our own 4-ton trucks. We had our own little regiment flight that could do force protection just for the squadron. And so it was instead of it being the size of a squadron, it was like twice the size, but it had all these support elements on it. And when that hooter would go, the whole kind of circus would leave, and we'd trundle off into somewhere in northern Germany and live in a forest for a few weeks, and then we'd come back. Now, I'm not saying we need to go and live in forests, but if I were to ask the station commander from Lossy, not to throw him under the bus here, because I'm sure he'd have a good go at it, but I want you to keep doing QRA for the next 3 weeks, but you can't be in any one place for more than 24 hours at any time. That would be quite the challenge.
Just before he left his role as Chief of the Air Staff, Inside Air sat down with Air Chief Marshal Sir Mike Wigston, where he discussed the many challenges, successes and frustrations he experienced during his 4 years leading the Royal Air Force. In this snippet, he tells us what impressed him the most about the RAF's people. Episode 65 comes in at number 6.
I cannot speak highly enough of the way our people have delivered on operations. And the shining example of that must be what people went through in 2021 with op pitting, the evacuation, almost no notice evacuation from Kabul. In the most difficult, harrowing circumstances, our people showed enormous skill, bravery, compassion, all the way through from the people securing the ground in Kabul, all the way through to the reception centres back here in places like Brize Norton. It was humbling to watch how people stepped up for that, and it is whilst just a snapshot in time, to my mind, sums up everything that we stand for and everything that we can take pride in as a service, and I certainly take pride in being part of a service that's capable, that is humans that are capable of that level of performance, courage, professionalism and compassion, all rolled into one. I look at the amazing work that we did as a service alongside the Navy and alongside the Army during the lockdowns, people out there in communities wearing our uniform with pride and helping people at really uncertain time, helping people get tested, get vaccinated, getting stores in the right place. And again, the resourcefulness and the resilience of our people, it cannot, it clearly got the attention of the public at the time, alongside the other emergency services and healthcare. But again, it just speaks to the adaptability of our people, and so it is that operational, that thread of operational service to the nation, service to our people, our population, and our allies, that time and time again just leaves me just in awe of what our people are capable of doing.
Military service would expose us to a whole host of experiences. Episode 55, Mindfulness Under Fire, comes in at number 5 and sees Flight Lieutenant Amy Casey speak to former RAF combat helicopter pilot turned mindset coach and best-selling author Sarah Furness about how her experiences in the RAF made her think about leadership from a different perspective.
People phrase it as combat pilot, and I'm only picking up on that because I know the listeners will probably know the difference. I'm not an Apache pilot. I don't go in and shoot people, as it were, but I do fly soldiers. We're a battle taxi. That's what we did. So it would be kind of disingenuous to say that I was in lots of action, but I was shot at a few times, and I did carry some very interesting soldiers doing some very interesting missions, particularly when I was in Iraq.
Now, you've taken a bit of a turn in your career since you've come out of service. So Tell me a little bit about what you're doing now.
Towards the end of my career, I started to become very interested in kind of how the brain works and how we can work with the mind. And I sort of discovered it as mindfulness, really. And I'd been quite resistant to the idea because I thought it was all about sort of sitting in a field of daisies. But I realized it's actually not that at all. It's about training your mind. And then I realized that actually a lot of the training that we'd done in our flying training and in our military training, all that kind of resilience, there were lots of things that I'd learned that I didn't realize, which were all about how to train our mind. And I realized that I was sort of sitting on a whole load of skills and knowledge that I could use to help other people. So I kind of picked all the best bits, if you like, of the military training, and then everything I now understand about the mind and how it works, and sort of clumped them all together so that I could help other people perform and feel their best.
Let's dig into that, because you are a performance expert. So first of all, let's start there. What is a performance expert?
It's helping people to work with their mind to perform tasks better, to have a higher output standard, to do them more quickly, and to make better decisions. And also, crucially, it's to be able to do that under pressure. And I understand now from the years in the military, but also from the coaching that I went through, is that you can train your mind to do that. And it's really about where you focus your attention and being able to keep your attention focused in the right place when you're under pressure.
What aspects of the military led you to create your own mindfulness formula?
Yeah, well, I tell a story quite often because it sort of models it really well. And it was when I had my first aircraft crash and I flew into wires when we were flying down a valley in Morocco. And at that point, I was 24 years old, so, youngish, I guess. And, your life flashes before your eyes, as everyone says. And I started thinking about, this is how I'm going to die. And, sort of started daydreaming about this. And then I remember the captain of the aircraft said, "Fly the aircraft, Sarah." And that was a mantra that we had. We always talked about fly the aircraft first. But in that moment, it was exactly what I needed, because my mind was wandering off in places it didn't need to be and wasn't helping me. And I needed to be focusing on flying the aircraft. And it's a really, really simple concept, but it's amazing how often we forget that we can control where our focus is. And actually, if we can focus our attention in the right place, that's really all we need to do to be able to perform under pressure. So I realized that actually all of our flying training had been about being able to prioritize what the most important thing was in each and every moment, and then focus our attention and have that, really quite laser focus on exactly where it needed to be in that moment.
Applying that to the day-to-day when we're going about just our regular duties and our regular life, as opposed to, a helicopter crash, when the chips are down and you have to do it, then obviously you're going to step up to the plate. But how do you make that happen during the day-to-day, Sarah?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, it's recognizing that the world we live in now is not particularly optimized in a way for us being able to focus in one place, because we've got so many distractions. Tech is so advanced now. I don't know about you, but I've got several applications open on my laptop right now. So lots of things are competing for our attention. It's about owning where your focus is, and you can do that every minute of the day. So in some ways, you're kind of on the front line all the time now, or, you're flying your aircraft all the time because we've got so many things distracting us. But I think the other thing that I really took away from my flying training and from military training was this kind of train hard, fight easy philosophy that we had. And we understood that if you want to do something in a battle zone when you're under pressure, it's got to be an automatic behavior, which means you train and train and train and train, and you repeat it over and over again so that your brain, when it comes down to it, doesn't have to think about it. It's an automatic behavior. So I think those are the two things. One is understanding that our environment isn't necessarily conducive to it, but we can choose where to focus our attention. And secondly, it's putting the time in to training our brains.
This is episode 75, Testing Military Aircraft. Each new aircraft and capability that comes into service will undergo rigorous testing by test professionals, including pilots, aircrew and engineers, to ensure they're safe and fit for purpose. To understand these critical works, Inside Air spoke to the RAF's Chief Test Pilot, Group Captain Steve Berry, about the balance between synthetic testing and real-time testing and evaluation in the air.
There's two things. If I describe synthetics as being what I think our listeners would call a flight simulator. So something they recognise, a box that you jump into, a representation of the world, a representation of the aircraft. If I use that as my definition, actually our job is first of all to make sure that represents the aircraft, and you can't do it the other way around. And it's a large it's actually a really quite a large body of our work is to make sure that the flight simulator looks and feels good enough. It has to be good enough to the real aircraft. And if there are any differences there, and you'd be surprised at how many there are, it's quite tricky to represent complex airplanes well, either their flight model or their systems model. So advise on the differences, what they are, okay, and then advise whether you think they're really critical and there's any kind of like big howlers that might come back to bite you in 5 or 10 years time. And again, those are out there. So quite a large job is not going in there to do tests, it's making sure we test the simulator to make sure it's the same as aircraft. So it's the real engineering, creating the data set that quite so. Now, once done, can we use that to help hone frontline tactics and stuff like that? Yes, you can, provided you understand the differences. So there's a bit of a flow that way. Now, that's what I think your users would call a flight sim. Other synthetic models and simulations are available. So, for example, Typhoon has a weapon system rig, the Whizzer, which is a largely exploded airplane, if you like, and we can stimulate that largely live model with various things, which helps us tune and test the defense phase system. Very useful way of doing that. So there are degrees of doing this. The modelling and simulation thing is not new. We've always done modelling. We've always stimulated those models somehow. It's just the models were made of balsa wood. And the stimulant was a wind tunnel. And that was never perfect because, if you know your aerodynamics, the Reynolds number will be wrong and you had to do various things to the air to cool it down to make it appropriate. So we've always done it. What we're doing nowadays is increasingly taking it from a real model or a real stimulant to a synthetic model, a synthetic stimulant. But there's still a burden there. You can get often more accuracy out of it. But if you want to keep that model going for the lifetime of an aircraft, you have to invest in that model, albeit it's just on a floppy disk, for example. Show my age there. You have to keep that going for 40 years of the program. So we've always been doing it. So if we're taking the synthetic thing and hoping to try and refine it, it's not cheap, it's not free. But what it does allow is it means you can hide it from our adversaries. So actually, the tension, if you like, and a big challenge we have at the moment is that increasingly, particularly for the high-end capabilities, we don't want to show our adversaries what we're doing in the live air. So we want to do that synthetically. But back to my first point, we have to prove that the model is correct and the stimulation of that model is correct. So how on earth do you square that circle? I don't have an answer. No one has an answer. It's a challenge we're trying to face.
Moving into the top 3 now, where in episode 68, F1 meets Typhoon, squadron leader Daz Scales was back at RAF Coningsby to shadow F1 driver George Russell. George was at the QRA base to swap the fast track for fast jets as he prepared for a flight in a Typhoon with RAF Typhoon display pilot Flight Lieutenant Matt Brighty. I think it's fair to say he enjoyed the experience.
How's the Triplex taxi work? West Ground, good afternoon, Triplex 11 flight of 2, request taxi from the main, information.
Triplex 11 flight, confirm you have information code Alpha copied.
Apologies, Alpha copied, Triplex. Here we go. I'm going to shortly start the pre-takeoff checks and stuff, so there'll be a couple of bits just to follow me through with. Okay. So I'll let you know. Cool, brakes are good, instruments you've got 997 set. Fuel, blues and whites on stage 1 for the time being. So hopefully they talk you through the performance takeoff. So it's pretty awesome. So we'll go from standing start to airborne at about 1,500 feet. Okay. So it's going to be some decent acceleration, not on par with what you're used to, but we'll be about 130 knots by the cable, and then we'll rotate kind of 70, 80 nose up. Okay. Enjoy.
Certainly will.
Ground Triplex ready for departure details.
Triplex 11 flight mid-east, climb flight level 90, walk inbound and outbound for Coningsby 1735 in sequence, course 1x3341, after departure stood 3 and previous 1x stood 12.
Triplex check. Cosby Tower, Triplex are ready for departure.
Triplex 11 flight, Coningsby Tower, clear for performance takeoff, service wind 27024 knots.
Clear performance takeoff, Triplex. And just one last check for me that you're happy in the back, my friend?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Cool. Here we go. It's good. Brakes off. Here we go. Sub 5. Let's rotate. Gear travels. Gears up, lights are out. There's 60 nose up. 230 knots, 70 nose up. There's 80 nose up, 3,000 feet. 200 knots. It's going to start to roll off a little bit there now. Trip 1, airborne to stop.
Holy moly.
Yeah, just a little bit of cloud here. It's got to capture 9,000 feet in the climb. So we're just going to do a little bit of combat, George.
Okay.
So I'll keep it nice and gentle. Please let me know if you're struggling with the G and stuff, and we'll just back it off. We're going to get ready to go and find the other guys.
The final mission of the sortie, air-to-air combat. For this element, Matt and George will be up against RAF Coningsby's Station Commander, Group Captain Billy Cooper.
Nice. Okay, I'm just going to make a radio call quickly. 1 is ready in the west.
And 2 is ready in east. Bogey, bullseye 09734, mid-block 3. Tracks 060, manoeuvres north.
This is essential training, not just for the pilots, but also the air battle space managers located in bunkers deep underground across the UK. They scan the skies looking for any airborne threats.
XXX-1, mission identified.
XXX-1, copy, mission identified. I do XXX picture.
Picture, single group, bogey aircraft, 08932, 35,000, tracks west.
Once identified, they will guide the QRA, Quick Reaction Alert, Typhoons to intercept and, if necessary, assist with engaging the target. Always informing the pilots of the airspace situation.
Magic, so group, bullseye 09821, 35,000, ID.
XXX-1 copies mission ID. So yeah, this is us simulating that we've been tasked to go and have a look at someone, and then just to ascertain whether they're a friendly or hostile.
Okay.
Cool, so he's just off out to our left now, on a kind of... So it's 1 Cali.
2 Cali.
Right, so we've seen each other.
I see him.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to re-merge, and it's going to keep sort of going down the hill, really.
Holy f***. That is fast.
Happy with the G?
Yeah. I'm okay. Cool.
It's 15 for 5,000. What we'll do is try and reel him in a bit closer. He's over the top of us. I'm just going to try and slow down and... Just rolling around him. And knock it off, get off, XXX-1 knock it off.
Knock it off, XXX-2.
Happy?
Nicely done.
How you feeling?
Yeah, that was cool, that was very cool. Yeah, it's very challenging to do the job and look where the other is at the same time, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, BFM is one of our kind of core skills, so we do a fair bit of training at BFM with the new guys and stuff. Alright, here we go. So we've got the gears down, we've just got this final turn to come, and we're back in for a nice gentle landing, hopefully.
Nice one.
I mean, firstly, huge respect for what everybody here does. I think, you know, the forces that you're going through when you're in the cockpit, but also when you're in combat and trying to look for the other aircraft at the same time, holding those skills, not only undergoing the forces but also having to take control of the situation is hugely impressive.
And what about the experience compared to Formula One in the jet today?
I mean, it is uncomparable, really. It was good. It was good.
A service as big as the Royal Air Force often undergoes some rejigging and restructuring. Following changes to where the RAF Regiment and RAF Police sit within the service, Inside Air met with Air Commodore Jamie Thompson to look at the evolution of force protection. We asked him what defines these two organisations in episode 56, which claims our number 2 spot.
I'll start with the police because there's often some confusion about, if it's just policing, why don't we have a defence police service, for example, in addition to the MOD police service? But for the Royal Air Force Police, they are configured and trained in a way that isn't just about policing duties. So, of course, we tackle crime, be that wherever it exists, or serious crimes, working into the newly established Defence Serious Crimes Unit, and the RAF Police have a role in that. But that policing element of being in the RAF Police is only one small element of their outputs. They do a huge amount of intelligence-led security operations, be that understanding how to protect our very, very sensitive material and capabilities, such as fifth-generation aircraft and the integration of those, our unique weapon systems, or indeed a myriad of other capabilities in the cyber domain. But they also take on some other duties for us as well. They work in a huge array of posts across the Strategic Command, within the National Cyber Force and within other partners in government. So they have a real huge mix of outputs and capabilities, which are all shaped around protecting air. From the RAF Regiment side, what is it that they provide that is unique or different to what could be provided by, for example, the British Army or the Royal Marines? Well, of course, that's kind of driven by the environments they work in and the domains. So the RAF Regiment are trained and organised and equipped to operate in what is known as the complex air-ground environment. And that's the interface where we operate our aircraft or our space platforms, or indeed some of the enabling equipment around those, to make sure that we protect at depth against any adversary that wants to operate against those facilities. But they also have separate specialisations as well. I mentioned briefly before counter-UAS. This is a real area of investment for the RAF Regiment, with the establishment of 2 Force Protection Wing as our counter-UAS wing.
What's UAS?
Our counter uncrewed aerial systems. So small drones, this is,
right.
Looking at those things, and you've seen it on videos online, no doubt, and particularly in the Ukraine crisis and the war in Ukraine, where both sides are frequently using drones to drop munitions, to gather intelligence, and to operate against the other side. What we've identified in the Royal Air Force is that we need to be able to protect ourselves and defence in the air environment against those threats. So by establishing this wing of 2 regular squadrons and 1 reserve squadron, we have both the workforce and increasingly the equipment in place to deal with those threats. And they're operating globally now as we speak.
And we've come to the final segment of our 2023 Top 10 recap. In this special episode, co-produced in association with BFBS, Flight Lieutenant Amy Casey speaks with former Chinook crewman Liz McConaughey, who, after a 17-year career in the back of the heavy lift combat aircraft, has really seen and experienced it all. From normalising extremes and wearing resilience as a mask, this was a really powerful episode. Episode 76, coming in at number 1 this year, is Liz McConaughey, Life on Chinook, Life After Chinook.
Let's talk about your career. 2 deployments to Iraq, and then there were 10 deployments to Afghanistan. Some pretty spicy moments. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the contacts that happened during those 10 deployments?
Yeah, so it started in Iraq, and Iraq was actually quite quiet for us. I mean, I know a lot of people listening to this, it wasn't quiet for everyone in Iraq, but certainly from the time I arrived, it was almost like a playground where I could cut my teeth as a crewman without getting shot at too often. I mean, we had the odd thing, but never any near misses. But Afghanistan was another step up from that, really. And I always refer to this thing called my normality bar, which is whenever I was in Iraq and we were having the intelligence brief about landing sites nearly being hit, it was like a week before they'd been contacted, and I was like, oh God, that's a bit dangerous. And then the next time we get a brief, it had been, mortared 2 days before, and I'd be like, oh God, this is spicy. And then we got to Afghanistan and it started to ramp up another bit. And, it was like, some of the landing sites we'd go into had been in contact an hour before we were going in. And then it became, in its heyday and its most kinetic, you'd be flying in, the landing site is under contact, but you have to go in and get the casualty, and you're never going to say no. I mean, that is our whole reason for living for the Chinook Force. Our whole sole purpose was MERT, really, at the very meat of it, and going to get those soldiers out of the battlefield was absolutely what we lived and died for. So we were always going to go, but you find yourself flying in and out of places in a hail of bullets, quite regularly, really. You know, there's unlike many people, there's one contact in your life. I had so many that we went in and out of landing sites that were just either under fire or we were being contacted as we lifted. But that became so normal.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you get used to that?
And that's the thing, is that this normality bar in my brain kept creeping up and up and up to the point where you'd be sitting on a landing site taking incoming fire and you didn't feel fear, you didn't feel in danger in any way, and because you were in what felt really comfortable environment. And it's worrying that by that point that's so how we felt comfortable. But our job was to man the weapons, very much so you're not going to start hiding behind the weapon because it's there to defend the aircraft and there to defend your crew and your mates ultimately. So you don't have the option of going, oh God, we're taking incoming, I'm on the deck. It's not like that. You can't take cover, you've got to stand there and you stand your ground and return fire. So yeah, it was pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, let's touch on that for a minute. When you talk about defending your crew by returning fire, some of the weaponry that you had access to, and that's a huge responsibility. Was that sort of by design or by the heat of the battle? How did that side of things unfold?
Yeah, so whenever we were in Iraq, we had a weapon called the M60 fitted, which is we had that at the door at the front and on the ramp. And the threat was kind of assessed as that was the only sort of self-defence we needed on the aircraft. But when we got to Afghanistan, we had the M134 fitted, which is a huge gun. It's about 57 kgs in weight, and it's called the minigun, which always used to make me laugh because there is nothing mini about that gun. And it's got a fire rate of 3,000 rounds a minute. Whoa. So, I mean, it just lights up the sky like a lightsaber and destroys pretty much anything that it hits. My sort of internal rules of engagement are always, if it's him or me, it's him. So if I get to the point where I know that if I don't pull that trigger, I'm going to either die or the rest of my crew are going to take a round, then that's when I felt the moment was right to pull the trigger. And certainly with the amount of murt that I've witnessed and the loss that I've seen, I think you have to really witness that loss to kind of respect the finality of death. And you can't take those moments back. Once you pull the trigger, once you kill someone, that's it. So I was always very, I think, measured. I wouldn't say careful is the wrong word, because you just have to be measured when you pull that trigger. If you hesitate in your decision, that's the wrong thing to do as well. So you just have to be clarity of thought, I think, which is somewhat difficult when you're under pressure.
I mean, thank you for sharing that with us. It's, I mean, you can only sit here and nod along and imagine, after 10 deployments, like you say, you've seen some pretty spicy things. I want to ask you about the near fatal wire strike.
Yeah, so ironically, I think the nearest I came to death in Afghanistan was this wire strike. I've had 2 near misses with bullets. I've got 2 bullets in my bedside drawer, ironically. Might make a pair of earrings out of them or something. But I still think the nearest I ever actually came to dying was this wire strike, and we were dropping off an underswing load at Kajaki Dam, which is about 45 minutes north of Bastion, up the Helmand Valley, and it's a beautiful place. It's probably one of the most beautiful places on the planet that I've ever flown over. And we dropped off an underswing load and then climbed out of the landing point and flew straight into a set of 250-foot high tension wires. So the same as you'd see in the UK here if you're driving along, the huge voltage ones. And as helicopter crews, we always refer to ours as helicopter killers. And in the UK, we do lots of recce's to look for them before we fly at night time so we can check where they are. And most of the time, we know where they are. Afghanistan was slightly different and they weren't always updated on the maps. So, we always keep a good lookout. That's one of the things we always look for. But we hadn't seen these ones through just a catalogue of being busy, us being heads in doing the underswing load. And we flew into them. So the first thing I remember was the smell. There was a massive bang and the smell of the aircraft was just pure electrical burning smell. It still stays with me today. But the wires sparked out into the 3 o'clock and the whole aircraft lurched. My crewmate Logie, he nearly went through the centre hatch and was saved by his harness that we have to wear that attaches us to the airframe. Yeah. So I sort of looked over my shoulder to check he was okay. And then the whole aircraft started to wallow towards the ground, and I held the front of my harness because I very much thought we were going to go into the ground and roll over, and I was going to have to escape the aircraft. But at about 10-15 feet off the ground, the co-pilot managed to pull in power because the cockpit had actually caved in and all the glass had come in over the pilot's eyes and he couldn't see. So hence why the co-pilot had to take control. So we managed to limp back into the air, and luckily we had another Chinook with us. We always used to fly in pairs back in those days before the Apaches were there. So he kind of chaperoned us back to Bastion, and the whole way back, it was probably the longest 45-minute flight of my entire life because I thought we were going to have to land on at any point and go on the run. So I had my go bag beside me. We always carry a go bag, which here in the UK is usually full of some dancing rig for a night out a night out somewhere. But in Afghanistan, it's pretty much just bullets and water. So I'd I moved that sort of right beside my crew station, and we made it back to Bastion. But yeah, pretty dicey affair all up, and very lucky to be alive at the end of it.
And that is Inside Air's top 10 episodes of 2023. All episodes can be streamed at any time on the Royal Air Force's YouTube channel or the usual podcast streaming platforms. We hope you enjoyed the variety of topics covered this year, and we look forward to bringing you with us again in 2024 as we go behind the wire of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. Until then, the Inside Air production team and correspondents wish you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.